much for making the time. I think this is a wonderful, for me personally, wonderful to chat a bit with you. But I think it's also really good for us, and especially for the engineers here and investors, to get a glimpse of what engineering is like on that side of the world. And at least the experience so far in this forum has been that the commonalities are incredible for such a different world. And maybe just as a quick introduction, of course, you're the technical director of the Mercedes EQ Formula E team. But maybe you can put a few words to that and to what that means, really, as I'm sure that it carries a lot more than what most people are aware of.
Thanks, Pedro. It's quite wide-ranging. So it involves, I think, firstly making sure that you've got the technical structure and capability you need to deliver performance. So particularly, have you got the good people, right people, but then also all the tools you need in terms of simulation, simulator, R&D support, so making sure that we're equipped to deliver championship wins. And then after that, it's really about making sure we focus on where the performance is. So making sure that we're looking at tires, control systems, car balance, making sure that we can extract everything we need out of the car. And that's in Formula E, it's very specialized. There's different sensitivities to Formula One or WEC. It's a different, very, very different formula. And then finally, just making sure we're reliable and within regulations, and that we operate well, because it's such a tight championship that you have to operate at a really very high level. Otherwise, any mistakes cost you a lot of points.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I think I'd like to pull on that thread maybe a bit later on, because it's one of our key kind of concerns at Vestas, or one of our key objectives is to ensure our customers see the best possible quality. But maybe before we jump into that, I think there's an interesting element that you mentioned around Formula E being this special world, right? And I think, at least from experience, right, it's a fundamental shift from Formula One, isn't it? Where you're a car, you're not as involved in the car's design, I assume. So how do you do that optimization that you mentioned?
Yeah, it is quite different. I must admit, coming from Formula One to Formula E, it took me a few months to get used to the differences. Obviously the physics are the same, but the sensitivities are very different. So in Formula One, 85% of it's aero. If you get the aero right, you're going to be quick. In Formula E, the aero is a very tiny part of it, but the control systems, the energy use, car balance as well, to a bigger extent than Formula One, is very, very important. So you have to refocus, you have to remap your head around some very different sensitivities, and then go and work in the right directions.
Yeah. You mentioned car balance. How do you tweak it in Formula E? Is it more software driven, or?
It's software and hardware. So you have the normal sort of adjustments of springs, anti-roll bars, front flap. So you've got, and diff, so you can change those. A little bit different to Formula One is that you can change those between qualifying and the race. So you've got more setup freedom between qualifying and race. But on top of that, all the electronic adjustments are very powerful. So you've got more authority on, being able to map your brake torque balance. You've got a lot of control systems that help the driver that we can tune. So there's a lot of scope in control systems.
How does it pan out when you're trying? So one of my passions personally is, of course, how do you set up a good strategy, and then carries home to my role here at Vestas. But one of the things that's really interesting, at least when you look at it from the outside, is, of course, when you follow Formula One, as you mentioned, aero is everything, and off the first tests, you're off, so your priority for the year, right? And then you work on the packages that you'll be releasing throughout the season. But I guess in Formula E, do you get that kind of similar season strategy, or is it more that you just tweak you have a long-term development path that's a bit more disconnected from how the car is performing on one specific race?
Yeah, I'd say it's a bit more disconnected, but because software is free on the car, there's almost like a race by race development program on software, sort of broadly similar to that drumbeat you'd have in Formula One on aero. There's a regular software software push. There's a new version every race. You often see 13 or 14 new features in each software release. The software advancement is huge, really, and then that does have a real performance benefit on the car.
Okay, that's super interesting. And how does it connect? So how does the whole feedback loop work? Is it also that I assume you still rely 100% on drivers kind of providing your feedback and the telemetrics, right?
Yeah, I mean that's very similar. So fundamentally you've got to make sure the driver's comfortable in the car, that he's got a stable car, a well-balanced car. So you're still relying very much on driver feedback, but we're also backing that up with the data we get back from the car. Now we're a bit limited in that we can't have live telemetry, but we do offload the data at the end of each run. So it enables us to look at the car balance in that data, and again, it's still very important to try and match that up to what the driver's saying, because there's sort of one truth in between all of that feedback that you need to extract.
I think it's something that we discussed with Nick on the first episode here, is around the communication exercise, right? And I think that's something it was a good lesson that we took home from that chat, is how important it is that engineers are able to understand the drivers and the other way around, right? To have that common communication channel, and then at least us engineers tend to think in a very specific way, and it at least from my perspective, for us, it seems like it's the only one because it's logical, but it doesn't always mean that it's everyone's.
No, that's it, and it's very important to sort of try and understand the weighting as well, between various driver comments, because they might have, they'll have different comments for all the different corner phases, but there might be only one of those that you really need to tackle that unlocks most of the performance. So there's still a lot of interpretation and a lot of data analysis to sort of extract where you should work and where you're going to get the performance.
And I think linked with that, and another thing that you mentioned in the beginning that I thought was super interesting is around your role in building up the right organization. Are there a specific set of values or a profile that you look for more than skills, or I assume it's always a mixture of both, but
it's broadly 50-50. So when we recruited quite sort of heavily in towards season 7, and we were looking for obviously very good technical skills, and that made up sort of I suppose almost half the weighting, 50% of the weighting, and the other 50% is more the human factors, working as a team, how people sort of respect each other when they're working, how open-minded they are, really how all the characteristics you want in someone who's a real team player, and is going to be able to deliver working as part of a team. Even going as far as sort of one of our mantras is see it, say it, fix it. So you want people to point out a problem, and then have a nice open discussion about how we're going to fix it. That's, zero blame, just let's get things out there and let's get them fixed. And it does work very well. We've got the team's gelled really, really well together, and it does operate as a very nice unit.
I think that's a nice statement. I've made a mental note on that one. See it, fix it has a nice ring to it. But it's and in your stint now, have you kind of come to favor a specific dynamic or area of the car that you think has piqued your interest in kind of absorbing everything that's Formula E related?
There's a lot of interesting aspects, and I think the really tough bit is it's so tight. You'll see the spread of lap times where there's, sort of can be 0.5, 0.6 across the whole grid. And it is the challenge is just trying to get everything right. because if you don't get everything right, you won't win. And it puts, I'd say, an even bigger emphasis on car balance than other formulas that have a bigger spread across the grid.
Yeah.
Because if your car balance isn't quite there, not only do you lose a little bit of lap time, but because those corner speeds are down, you're losing energy as well.
Yeah.
So you get
a double whammy.
penalized. Yeah, it's a very tough formula for trying to get a car in a really good balance window.
I guess you get a third effect, which is also your driver confidence is probably also going down because they'll see the car less stable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you know, as you well, you do see this in other formula as well, but as a slightly poor balance also is then heating the tyres up and driving an even poorer balance. So it's there's a real challenge to get that in a nice sweet spot, and I think that's I found that quite interesting because the comparison with that to Formula One is, I mean, balance is important in Formula One, but it tends to be swamped a bit by just adding downforce to the car.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned this, right? It's something that, of course, for us with our partnership in terms of collaborating with weather forecasts, it's always an interesting dialogue to understand the implications. And we've had good chats on that of how that data enriches your strategy. And maybe on a more practical level, how do you deal with tire setups, right? So you'll have an idea of the forecast, but of course it's a very different approach when you have a single tire. So is it more of a tweaking the car to the different weather forecasts, or how do you kind of work with?
Yeah, it is a bit. I mean, it's the all-weather tire from Michelin. It's a very good tire. But it's got a very difficult remit, effectively, because to have a tire that works in the wet and runs to a hot track in the dry is a super difficult thing to do.
Right. Yeah.
And generally on a dry track, particularly a hot dry track, we're tending to fight the rear tyres overheating. So we're always trying to get ourselves in a window where the front tyres are warm enough to work properly. So we have to get heat into the fronts, but we want to keep the rear tyres as cool as possible. And that sort of drives how you design your sort of say your outing program and your qualifying program for what you do in terms of outlaps, but it also drives very much what we do for our car setup for qualifying and for the race, to try and get the time management as good as we can.
So it's a similar dynamic. It just changes the kind of your drivers into it. So that's super interesting, right? Because it's, again, racing is, the weather is one of the key elements, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and that having those forecasts is massively helpful because if we know it's going to be say another 4 degrees temperature on the track, then we can adjust setup for it. So it's super helpful. Every little bit of information like that just helps you do a better job when you come into qualifying on the race.
One question: how much? And we had a quick talk about this in the past as well. But how much do you rely now on kind of automated data interpretation versus the more maybe old school way of just relying on instinct and experience?
Yeah, no, I think it's going more and more data driven. And it's certainly the way we like to work because, hunches are dangerous. You can convince yourself of something, and if you haven't got the data to back it up, you can quite often be in trouble. Yeah. But you do have to question the data. You can have sensor problems or inaccuracies with processing. So you've always got to be on your toes. But we are trying to drive our decisions more and more with statistics that we get back. So not just the raw data off the car, but processed statistics to help us understand what's happened to the car through a run. And we're trying to apply more and more science to it, more inbuilt models of the car actually running on the car, so we get better information off it. So there's a lot of technology around trying to improve our sort of construction of the data and really enriching it compared to just log channels.
And basically extracting the threads, right? Because it's having a lot of data means nothing if you can't process it the right way, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and we're so short of time as well, because with a race event, starting from a free practice session at 7:15 in the morning and a race being at 2 o'clock, your 2 practice sessions, a quali in a race, it all happens super quick.
Yeah.
So you've got to be able to get that understanding out of the data quite fast.
Yeah, and then kind of actionable data.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think pulling back on what we mentioned at the beginning, this consistency element, it's always something that fascinated me around racing drivers, but it's also something that is incredible around any racing. But I think, as you mentioned, in Formula E, it becomes extra relevant. How difficult it is. I don't think people outside of a racing event understand how difficult it is, both for a driver but also for a team, to keep that quality and consistency lap after lap, weekend after weekend. Is that something that you put kind of a dedicated focus into as a team, or is it just something that permeates into the culture and everything you do?
No, I'd say we put a dedicated focus on it. So we put a real focus on going through what we did at the race in post-race meetings and performance meetings a week later, so that we really understand what happened, what we did, how that resulted with the performance of the car on the track. And then as we build up to a race with pre-race meetings, we're really trying to think about how we deliver the right setups for the car and for the drivers when we get to the next event. So there's a real sort of drumbeat program of sort of understanding, and then taking that understanding into the next race.
How much knowledge do you carry over, or is it just that you build that bigger cloud of statistics that you draw upon? Do you still have kind of, because they also change quite a bit, right? Year on year, it's not like you're used to the same circuit from the year before.
Yeah, they do change a lot, and it's the ones that stay the same, maybe they're a little bit easier. The ones that are new, we do a lot of pre-simulation work and then simulator work. So the offline simulation helps us understand the characteristics of the track. So what it's like for energy, whether it's ride height sensitive compared to other tracks, to give us a sort of fingerprint of it, so we know where it lies. And then all the simulator work we do gets the drivers used to the layout, because they've got no time when they get there. And it also enables us to run a lot of different scenarios for control systems and energy use. So that simulator program is really crucial to being able to turn up at a new track and be in pretty good order.
Have you found a favorite yet? A track that you've is kind of a pet favorite for yours? Or
they're all interesting in their own way, and I suppose you tend to have the ones you like and remember, especially the ones where you won. So
that makes sense.
That usually drives it. I mean, I think this year we enjoyed winning Monaco. That was particularly nice to win, on exactly the same circuit that F1 use. That was quite a special event.
And then how about the ones coming ahead?
Yeah, I think for the ones coming up, we know New York and we know London. Seoul is going to be interesting because that's a new track, so we're all looking forward to that one. We sort of take it a race at a time and try and deliver the best at each track. But yeah, any new track's always fun because there's things to learn.
I guess there's also a lot of logistics. I at least remember way back when the first Formula One races in Seoul, there's a lot of logistics that were behind the scenes of even uncertainties on how to reach the hotels and getting the cars on track.
Yeah, it can be tricky, and we're fortunate to have some people who are really good on the logistics side. So it takes the pain out for the engineering side. It's a lot of work making sure that you turn up and you know what you're going to do in terms of building the garage, and that the facilities are there. But generally it's managed pretty well. How
do you see kind of a Formula E evolving, and then the electric racing in general? So of course with Formula One becoming hybrid a few years back, and now Formula E get kind of growing and peaking in popularity.
Formula One and Formula E are heading slightly towards each other. When Formula One head to the new MGUs that are 350 kilowatts for 2026, that motor actually is very similar to the 350 kilowatt motor we will use in Gen 3. So there's some similarities, and I suspect over time Formula One is going to head more and more to more electric power. Whether it'll ever join up, I don't know. But you know, it's when you look at what's happening in road car, the progression is pretty obvious. You know, there's already a lot of people driving electric cars now, and another 5 years' time, that'll probably double or treble. So it's only heading one way.
Oh, exactly. That tends to be the way that the future. At least that's certainly one of the bets that we're making from our side. But it's also really interesting. It's as you mentioned, right? And maybe a very technical question, but if you had an option to choose an area of the car that you can unlock for development and competition, would you have a favorite? Would you go for aero, or would you go for motor development?
Motor development has been really fruitful, and it's something we've enjoyed doing with HPP, and the motor's beautifully efficient. It's over 97% from power coming in from the battery to what goes out of the wheels, which is
incredible.
And that's been a fun area. But obviously, when you've only got 3% left, there's a bit more to come, but it's difficult to extract. I think the two big areas that would be exciting for Formula E would be battery. Obviously, would be massive if battery development was opened up. And that would be very relevant to road car.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think that would probably be the most exciting. The other one, if you want to make the cars quicker, would be to open up aero development. But then you start to throw up problems on the budget to run safety and ton programs, and also the corner speeds on straight tracks.
Yeah, no, that's clear. And I think you're spot on to the battery development, right? That's also a focus area for us. Storage is one of the key challenges for the future.
Yes.
And I think one of the beautiful things of motorsport historically has been that it has been a lever to unlock so many technologies that then have been kind of a stablemate of normal car industry, right? And batteries becoming quickly the bottleneck, but also the biggest opportunity for the future of electrification. So.
Yes, I think it's been broadly put on the table for Generation 4, but it's a really interesting one, because if you open it up completely, then the costs of a battery development race are very big. But technically, it's very interesting. So there's a balance to be struck.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's clear. That's always the balance in most motor racing when you have open development, isn't it? It's
yeah.
Is there a now kind of thinking about your you've gone across quite a bit, right? And your quite amazing career. Do you have any specific moments that you're really happy about that kind of if you look back?
I mean, I suppose I've been doing it a long time, so quite a few. I mean, back in Formula One days, I enjoyed winning Monaco with the Arno Trulli. That was brilliant. 2004. The championships that followed at Renault were pretty good. 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
And then more recently in Formula E, the championship last year with Mercedes was fantastic. Yeah. And we want to try and repeat it this year. So, you tend to focus on the bits you won.
Of course, yeah. My memories still go back to the few race wins we had in my period as well. So I think there's
that would be Lotus Renault. Was it Lotus?
Yeah, there was Lotus, and then just before we had the Renault. Well, we had Brazil with Alonso.
Nice. Yeah.
Well, I think we're in. The Mercedes Formula E team is in quite a privileged position right now for the championship. How is your confidence looking ahead to the?
So I would say that's a tough question. I wouldn't say we're confident. I say because it's always better to be a little bit scared.
Yeah.
We've got a small lead, but it is only small. So we have to, we've absolutely got all the tools to deliver the championship. but we're going to have to get everything right. If we have a race where we crash or we have a reliability problem and someone else scores 25 points, we're in trouble. So, we absolutely can do it, but we need to keep scoring every race and then score big on the occasions when we're really running well.
And I think that goes back to the consistency element, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe just reflecting on that, I think it's one, for me at least, joining Formula E a few years ago as a fan. It's I think equal parts interesting and baffling to see how varied, how much range you can have in race winners across a championship, and how unpredictable it is.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what makes it so tough. I think in Jakarta, Nick only missed out going into the sort of dual stages by 300ths of a second, and Stoffel made a mistake in one corner that dropped him out of the quarterfinals. So it's super close.
Would you say that based on that there's more driver dependency than other racing formats, or is it a bit the same?
I think there probably is. Yeah, I think because it's such a close grid, then it does put a little bit more onus on the drivers. I suppose if you can find an advantage in the car where you can find a 10th, then that's going to be a big thing as well. So, but generally the grid is pretty close. So the drivers do have to be super consistent.
And I guess we touched upon it a bit, but I think could you put a few words in terms of how do you see this relationship between Vestas and the Mercedes EQ Formula E? I think we talked about the data, right, and how relevant it is to you guys.
Yeah, well, I think having a technical partner of the with the sort of breadth of experience and resource that Vestas has is super important to us, because there's always areas of energy use that might not be, we might not have in the front of our minds, and it can help unlock, new ideas and new ways for us to work. And that goes beyond just sort of hardware. That goes into how you look at energy use, how you analyze it. So there's a lot of synergies there, and sometimes you don't even know there's a synergy there until you find a way to unlock it, and then you realize there's that breadth of experience. So there's a lot that can be pulled out of that partnership.
How do you see the dynamics between the next race? Because
London will be, probably a chunk cooler. Also London's interesting because it's half indoor, half outdoor. So when you get a wet event, we're going to have a half dry, half wet track, which we've had before there. So and London's quite technical. There's a lot of very tight corners. So
fantastic, Nick. It was an absolute pleasure to talk and see you, and thank you so much for setting this time aside.
Pleasure. Thank you, Pedro.
Take care and good luck for the rest of the season. We'll be rooting for it.
Thank you very much.